My name is David Stouck, and I've published a book about Arthur Erickson. Arthur Erickson is Canada's foremost architect. He lived from 1924 to 2009. He designed some of the most famous buildings in this country. But he also designed and had built in other parts of the world a number of buildings that stand out in terms of the world's architectural heritage. Well, Arthur Erickson was born in Vancouver in 1924, and it was a small city then. It was smaller than Winnipeg, but there were a number of young people like Arthur Erickson himself who were going to eventually emerge as among Canada's greatest art figures. There were some older ones as well. He fell at an early age under the, you might say, the tutelage of Lorne Harris. Lorne Harris and his wife had moved to Vancouver in 1941 when Arthur was about 16. And Lorne Harris became a close friend of Emily Carr's. And so there was something of an environment for the arts there that was very much fostered by his parents as well, and some of the older families in Vancouver that he knew. It was, we couldn't call it a renaissance in Vancouver because it's really just a coming to birth and emerging from the forest at that time. But it gave him nonetheless it was a very conducive environment in which to, a nurturing environment, I should say, for a young man of imagination, of talent himself. He started out as a painter, but it was when he saw the larger world as a young soldier and then as a traveler with a scholarship that he turned to the idea of being an architect. When he began traveling to other countries, one of the most crucial experiences he had was in Japan in the summer of 1961. Because when he was in Japan, he went to see a certain tea house in a place called the Moss Garden, Kokadera. And what amazed him was that this little tea house was so, in his words, shabby. How could this possibly be one of the most important buildings in this country? It looked to be falling apart. It didn't make any sense at all. He left the garden, and the more he thought about it, the more he decided he had to answer this question: why? Why is this the most important building in Japan? So the next day he went back and he told himself, I'm not going to get up from under this tree where he was seated looking at the tea house. I'm not going to get up. I'm not going to have anything to eat or drink until I can understand what this building means. And then eventually, after several hours had passed, he heard a rustling in the trees nearby. And what he saw were a group of gardeners, and they had tiny, tiny little scissors, and they were clipping away at the bushes, and it hardly made any difference, and yet it was a kind of grooming that made everything look absolutely perfect. And what it made him see was that what they were doing was they were revealing how a tree has a form and how it grows. And that's when he came to understand what the Japanese aesthetic was about, that the buildings were also viewed as being living things like trees, and that this was the measure of human understanding. Well, after his great successes in Vancouver with Simon Fraser University and various other buildings, he decided, it became clear to him, I should say, that if he was going to be a national architect, he had to have an office in Toronto, and he had to have commissions here. And probably the most important one of those commissions here in this city was Roy Thomson Hall, which was completed in the early 1980s. Roy Thomson Hall, of course, is situated in downtown in Canada's largest city, a very different kind of setting from the buildings that he had put up in Vancouver. It was originally supposed to have had a 3-acre park around it. That was something that attracted him to the whole commission. And that was lost as the project went forward. The other part of the project that he was particularly concerned with was to have the glass around the building to not even show its joins, all the different segments of glass, such that it almost was like a glacier rather than the side of a building and a roof and so forth. The building is a success. In most critics, architecture critics would see that call it a success. I wrote this book with Arthur Erickson's help, in the sense that for 2 or 3 years, he and I would meet often and spend 2 or 3 hours discussing things. And when I first met him, he says, well, if you're serious about writing a book about my work, you're going to have to go and see the places that meant so much to me when I was young. And those places were particularly Florence, Italy, Kyoto, Japan, and the island of Bali in Indonesia. He also mentioned Greece, of course. But, and I did that. That was certainly part of the research for this book. There was lots of archival materials in various institutions in this country. But every bit as important was to go and see those buildings, because you just had to experience not just buildings but landscapes such as the one in Bali and the gardens of Japan, and in order to be able to get your own imaginative sense of what it was that these things, what spell that they had for the architect himself.